This is Ilya with Worn & Wound, and today we're going to take a look at the Sinn 103 Ti UTC IFR. In the summer of 2016, we wrote about Sinn's development of a new pilot's watch standard through DIN, the German Institute of Standardization. That standard codifies what it means to be a pilot watch, building on the test staff standard that first introduced in 2012. In order to be DIN certified, a watch has to meet certain criteria with regards to general functionality, legibility, and performance under extreme conditions. For example, a watch must be water resistant to 200 meters, it must remain functional within a temperature range of -45 degrees Celsius and up to 80 degrees Celsius, and it must be able to handle repeated changes in air pressure, among a handful of other requirements. Sinn's announcement of these new guidelines coincided with the release of 3 new watches designed around that standard. The 103 Ti UTC IFR was one of those watches. At $3,470 on a strap and $3,780 on a bracelet, it's not an inexpensive watch, but it's one that comes with a lot packed into it. Let's take a closer look. In terms of the overall aesthetic and design, the case for the 103 is an attractive mix of hard lines and angles that recall numerous vintage designs, particularly the Breguet Type 20 watches from the 60s and 70s and the second generation Heuer Atavia. The case here is matte, bead-blasted titanium, which has a gray, slightly warm tone. It measures 41 millimeters wide, 48 millimeters lug to lug, and 17.6 millimeters thick. The overall size is very comfortable with a tempered length, making it wearable on a wide range of wrist sizes. It is, however, undeniably a thick watch. It gets a lot of that height from a bulging case back, which is topped off with a domed sapphire crystal. Though this looks cool, in a practical sense, it forces the watch to sit a bit higher off the wrist, rather than sink into it. It's not uncomfortable. In fact, I actually really like the way the watch wears, but it is worth noting for those who consider the height of a watch a sink or swim issue. Like most higher-end Sinns, this one has a lot of tech packed into the case. To prevent the watch from filling with moisture, Sinn uses their 3-pronged AR dehumidifying technology. First, there's a drying capsule in the case right off 7 that is filled with copper sulfate. This absorbs and binds any moisture that enters the watch. It starts off with a light shade of blue, like you see here, and it darkens as it absorbs more moisture over time. If it suddenly turned dark blue, that would probably indicate that a significant amount of water had entered the watch and it would need to be serviced. Second, Sinn fills the case with an inert gas, which creates a 0 to low humidity atmosphere inside the watch and pushes out any moisture that may have gotten in there during assembly. This helps keep the oils from aging prematurely, and it will keep the crystal from fogging if there are sudden drops in temperature. And finally, Sinn uses a special EDR seal, EDR meaning extreme diffusion reduction, to ensure that less moisture enters the case, about 25% of what standard seals allow. The bezel then features a 60-click bidirectional ratcheting mechanism with a countdown insert. Unlike most bezels, which are snapped onto a case, Sinn's captive bezel has a safety system that ensures that it cannot be knocked off accidentally. It's unclear exactly how this works, but the bezel has a series of small screws which likely help keep it attached to the ratcheting system. Either way, the bezel boasts a really satisfying action with springy clicks in both directions. Flipping the watch over, you have a Valjoux 7750 with an added GMT complication. It's a workhorse movement that's been time-tested over the years and beloved for its reliability and hard-wearing nature. Sinn generally does a good job at decorating their movements, and that's no exception here. Aesthetically, I like the facelift the 103 Ti UTC IFR gives the 103 line. It's a more contemporary approach to what was essentially a vintage design. The goal here is to maximize legibility, which is something that Sinn does very well. The primary index features large Arabic numerals, omitting the 3 for the date and 9 and 12 for the 2 totalizers. Lume rectangles below this index are positioned at 5-minute intervals, with simple lines in place for the remaining minutes. The subdial at 9 is the active seconds, and the one at 12 is a 30-minute totalizer. Within the subdial, you have large loomed rectangles positioned at every 5 minutes, a detail that really makes the register easy to read, even at a glance. Furthermore, the 6 on the primary index is loomed. You'll notice that the 12-hour totalizer at 6 is no longer there, replaced by a graphic DIN 8330 stamp. So what you have here is essentially a 30-minute chronograph, which I do find a bit odd. By contrast, the EZ-M13, which we reviewed a while back, features a modified 60-minute totalizer, which definitely could have been cool here. The hands then are bold lume swords. Orange accents color code and emphasize the chronograph function. The central chronograph hand is a long tapering needle, and it features an orange base, a detail that is then carried over to the loomed arrowhead at the 30-minute totalizer, which also has an orange base. Why orange? Because orange is a highly legible color not represented by any other function in a cockpit, the way green and yellow are, for example. Its limited application here is effective and not too loud, and it gives the watch a bit of personality without drawing too much attention to it. Finally, there's a dark gray UTC hand. What's interesting about its implementation here is that unlike other watches, Sinn chose to de-emphasize the hand by making it tonally similar to the dial. It's there if you need it, and it's largely unobtrusive if you don't, and you can always tuck it under the hour hand if you don't want it there at all. On the wrist, the 103 Ti UTC IFR looks really good. It's casual and sporty, but not so much so that wearing it daily would look too out of place unless you work in a really stuffy environment. Like I mentioned before, this is a thick watch, but it's not uncomfortable. The case is titanium, so it's really light on the wrist at about 69 grams for the head alone. The watch is available on a black leather strap or a matching titanium bracelet. The sample we have in for review is obviously on the leather strap. It's a high-quality band, padded at the center and adorned with contrast orange stitching. It's not exactly to my taste, especially the contrast stitching, but I rarely love OEM straps, and swapping this one out is pretty simple. The bracelet, though I haven't handled it, appears to be in line with most other H-Link bracelets from Sinn, which I quite like. All in all, this is a very cool watch. Like with most Sinns, I'm impressed with the quality and the overall design, give or take a few details. My biggest point of contention would probably be the lack of a 12-hour totalizer, but as a casual wearer, it really doesn't impact my experience with the watch and the complication. In terms of pricing, I think it's positioned correctly relative to others in the 103 family when you consider the level of tech in the watch. Should you not care about tracking an additional time zone, the non-UTC variant is quite a ways cheaper than the one that we have here. For the full review, head on over to warnerwound.com, and if you like our content, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.